Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of newspaper reading.
Now we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 8th of February 2019, and the news that would be covered today is given on the screen, and the timestamp for the same is given in the description and the comment section given below. And so now with this, let us start with the first article. Now we have taken this lead editorial from the editorial page on page 8. Now what this article does is compare the performance of the Government of India from 2014 till 2019, and it compares the performance of the Government of India on three major international indexes. Whereby the first index that the author takes is the Ease of Doing Business Index, the second index that the author takes is the Human Development Index, and the third and the final index on which the author compares the performance of the government is the Environmental Performance Index. Now, since this article talks about three different indexes which fall in different purviews of your mains examination, whereby the Human Development Index falls within GS Paper 2 within the section Social Justice, while the Ease of Doing Business Index and the Environmental Performance Index falls in Paper 3, respectively in Economic Development and in Environment. Now you have to understand that the main focus of this article is political in nature, whereby it compares the performance of the government from 2014 till 2019. But nevertheless, let us understand the main facts which have been highlighted by the author. Now the author is looking at the ranking of India in three major indexes, first being the Ease of Doing Business Index, the second being the Human Development Index, and the third being the Environmental Performance Index. And the author is taking an overview of these rankings so as to judge the performance of the Government of India. Now the first indicator that the author talks about is the Ease of Doing Business Index. Now this Ease of Doing Business Index is given out by the World Bank, and it is mainly meant as an index of the effect of government regulations on running a business. Now with regards to the Ease of Doing Business Index report, the author has highlighted that India's rank was 134 in 2014, while India's rank has now improved to 77 in 2018, whereby India is now ranked among the top 50% countries in the Ease of Doing Business Index report. Now, according to the author, what this Ease of Doing Business Index report is showing is that India's rank has improved, whereby this shows that government regulations have actually decreased within India, and starting and conducting a business within India has actually improved. Now, after this, the second index that the author looks at is the Human Development Index, whereby this index is provided by the United Nations Development Programme, whereby the Human Development Index provides a combination of indicators of income, health, and education within a country. Now, the author has shown that India's ranking in the Human Development Index was 130 in 2014. And what has happened is that India is still ranked 130 in the ranking of 2018. And according to the author, what this is showing that India's HDI ranking has not improved despite India becoming the world's fastest growing economy, whereby this ranking of 130 in the Human Development Index puts India at the bottom one-third of the world countries. Now after this, the third ranking that the author talks about is of the Environmental Performance Index. And this Environmental Performance Index is produced jointly by the Yale and the Columbia University, whereby both the universities produce this Environmental Performance Index in collaboration with the World Economic Forum. Now the main objective of the Environmental Performance Index is that it provides various performance indicators across two main objectives, first being environmental health and the second being ecosystem vitality. Now what the author is showing in the Environmental Performance Index is that India's ranking in 2014 was 155. However, in 2018, what has happened is that India's rank has actually fallen to 177. And therefore, what the Environmental Performance Index has shown is that India is among the worst performing country on the environmental front, whereby India has been ranked 177 out of 180 countries. And therefore, lastly, what the author is showing by comparing the Ease of Doing Business Index report, the Human Development Index report, and the Environmental Performance Index report, based on India's ranking in 2014 and in 2018, is that there has been improvement in the business environment, but India's performance on social indicators such as income, health, and education, and India's performance in the environment has been worse off. Whereby with regards to the environmental factor, India is soon going to be among the lowest ranked country. And similarly, India has made no form of progress with regards to social indicators within income, health, and education, irrespective of the fact that India has been the highest economic growing country within the world. And it is within that regard that the author has given a conclusion that ill fares the land where wealth accumulates, but the social and natural environment suffers. Whereby even though that the business environment within India has increased, but the social indicators and the environmental indicators continue to suffer within India. And hopefully you've understood as to the main crux of this article. However, what is more required for you to understand from this article is about the Ease of Doing Business Index Report, the Human Development Index Report, and the Environmental Performance Index Report, and largely from the perspective of your upcoming prelims examination of 2019. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this opinion-based editorial from the editorial page on page 8. Now as you already understand that there is a proposal of the United States to withdraw from Afghanistan, and you should see this article as part of the continuous coverage of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, whereby what this article talks about is that if the US withdraws from Afghanistan, that India can utilize Iran so as to improve its own position with regards to negotiations around Afghanistan. Now, as you would already know, you should see this article from the perspective of GS Paper 2 within the section International Relations. Now, as you already understand that the United States is currently in negotiations with the Taliban for a peace agreement for Afghanistan. And similarly, Russia is also indulging in the Moscow format so as to form a peaceful settlement for Afghanistan. And according to the author, an effective peace settlement for Afghanistan will only emerge and remain if it will be supported by the regional powers. Now, these regional powers are Iran, India, Russia, and China. Whereby, according to the author, each one of these countries would want a stable government within Afghanistan. However, according to the author, the current problem is that the United States considers Iran, Russia, and China as its opponent within Central Asia. And therefore, what is happening is the United States under Donald Trump is not willing to cooperate with either Iran or China for a possible peace settlement for Afghanistan. And thereby, this is becoming a problem to form an effective peace settlement for Afghanistan, which will include comprehensive participation and support of all the major regional players within Asian continent. And within that context, the author has given a probable solution. Now, what used to happen is that during Obama administration, a 6 plus 1 group meeting was held, which included the country of Afghanistan, China, India, Iran, Pakistan, Russia, and the United States, whereby it included all the major regional powers, since it was considered that each of these regional powers were essential for the achievement of a political settlement for Afghanistan. However, what happened is that after the election of Donald Trump, this 6 plus 1 group meetings was stopped. And according to the author, if this 6 plus 1 group meeting process is again restarted, then it could include all the regional powers who would be willing to form an effective peace settlement for Afghanistan. And within that context, the author has highlighted that India can take the lead in convincing the United States for engaging with Iran, Russia, and China, and again held meetings of the 6 plus 1 group. Now, within that regard, the author has given 3 advantages for India, whereby if India is able to convince the United States for engaging with Russia, China, and especially with Iran to form an effective peace settlement for Afghanistan, then firstly, it could lead the negotiated settlement that is being formed from Afghanistan to have the support of the other regional powers. Whereby what is currently happening is that the United States is negotiating with the Taliban with support from Pakistan. And what this has done is left the Afghan government, Iran, Russia, China, and other major regional powers out of the negotiations. And it is within that context that the author is saying that if India is able to convince the United States to include Iran, Russia, and China in the negotiated settlement for Afghanistan, then it could have the support of all the major regional players. And thereby, what this would do was ensure the stability of any form of negotiated settlement for Afghanistan. The second main advantage that the author is highlighting is that India can utilize Iran to reduce the significance of Pakistan in Afghan politics. Now, as you already understand that what is currently being happening is that in the negotiations between the United States and Taliban, Pakistan is playing a major role in conducting these negotiations. However, if Iran joins the negotiations with regards to between United States and Taliban, and similarly for conducting trade through the Chabahar port for Afghanistan, it would reduce the significance of Pakistan within Afghan politics. And thereby what the author is recommending is that India should negotiate with the United States based on common interest to India, Iran, and Afghanistan. However, you have to understand that this is a very far-fetched view, whereby the United States currently has imposed sanctions on Iran, and similarly, the allies of the United States, such as Saudi Arabia and Israel, are also opposing Iran. And therefore, it becomes very unlikely that the United States would partner with Iran in Afghanistan. However, one point that the author has made is that various European allies of the United States have not imposed sanctions on Iran. And so therefore, if United States does partner with Iran within Afghanistan, then it probably might be supported by its European allies. Now, the third and the final advantage which the author is highlighting, whereby what has currently happened, is that India has replaced Pakistan as Afghanistan's largest trading partner. And what this means is that this provides India with increased leverage over other neighbors with regards to negotiations about Afghanistan. However, one of the main aspects which has led to India replacing Pakistan as Afghanistan's largest trading partner was that in 2017 the Chabahar port was opened. And this Chabahar port is located in Iran, and therefore it becomes essential for India that Iran becomes a part of any form of negotiated settlement within Afghanistan, whereby currently India and Iran have common interests within Afghanistan. And if Iran is included in any form of negotiations with regards to settlement within Afghanistan, then it would also increase the leverage of India. And moreover, India is also dependent upon Iran, mainly the Chabahar port, for its trade with Afghanistan. And since India, Iran, and Afghanistan have a common interest in the Chabahar port, it also thereby becomes essential that Iran does become a part of any form of negotiated settlement for Afghanistan. And since India and Iran are developing the Chabahar port together, it also increases the leverage of India over Iran and thereby over any form of negotiations with Afghanistan in which Iran is a part. Now you have to understand that this current news is in transition. Now you should consider this article as a continuation of the coverage that the Hindu and the Daily News Simplified has provided with regards to international politics within Afghanistan. And therefore now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 14. Now what this article talks about is that in the International IP Index, India's position has risen to 36th place, whereby in 2018 India was at the 44th rank. However, in the 2019 ranking, India's ranking has improved to 36. Now you need to see this article from the perspective of GS Paper 3 within the section Technology and within the subsection Issues relating to intellectual property rights. Now apart from that, you should also understand about the International IP Index from the perspective of your upcoming prelims examination of 2019. And before understanding about the International IP Index itself, let us understand on how questions have been asked in your previous prelims examination on various indexes and report. Whereby this understanding on how previous year questions have been asked on indexes and report would also give you the perspective on why the Ease of Doing Business Index, the Human Development Index, or the Environmental Performance Index are also important for your prelims examination. Wherein previously questions have been asked in your prelims examination as to which organization prepares which index. Wherein if you take a look at the prelims paper of 2018, a question was asked as to who prepares the Rule of Law Index, wherein the correct answer to this question is the World Justice Project. Wherein if you take an example of the prelims examination paper of 2017, a question was asked as to who prepares the Global Gender Gap Index report, wherein the correct answer to this question is A. World Economic Forum. And if in similar terms, if you take an example of the prelims examination paper of 2016, it had asked as to what are the indicators of the Global Hunger Index report, and the correct answer to this question is C. 1, 2, and 3. Similarly, it had asked as to who prepares the Ease of Doing Business Index, wherein the correct answer to this question is C. World Bank. And moreover, the 2016 paper had also asked as to who prepares the Global Financial Stability Report, wherein the correct answer to this question is B. International Monetary Fund or IMF. Now, this International IP Index report has been released by the Global Innovation Policy Center, which is under the US Chamber of Commerce, whereby the objective of the International IP Index report is to benchmark activities which are critical to innovation surrounding patent, trademark, copyright, and trade secret protection. Now, the main unique feature of the International IP Index is that it analyzes the intellectual property climate in 50 world economies, whereby in the International IP Index, these 50 world economies are then ranked on 40 unique indicators. Now, these are the three main points that you need to remember about the International IP Index with regards to your upcoming prelims examination of 2019, whereby it is formed by the Global Innovation Center, which is under the US Chamber of Commerce, And the main objective of this index is to benchmark activities which are critical to innovation in patent, trademark, copyright, and protection of trade secrets. And this international IP index analyzes intellectual property climate in 50 countries, and it then produces the rank based on 40 unique indicators. Now, apart from this, the another aspect that you should understand as to what has been the cause of improvement in India's ranking in the International IP Index. Now, India's rank has improved due to the passage of the guidelines on the examination of computer related inventions that was passed by the Government of India in 2017. Apart from this, another reason as to why India's ranking has improved, which has been given in the report, is because the Government of India has implemented some of the features of the National Intellectual Property Rights Policy, such as the Government of India has simplified various procedures for registration of trademark. However, these were the only two reasons given in the report as to why India's ranking has improved. However, the report has highlighted various weaknesses with regards to India's protection given to intellectual property rights. Wherein the first reason given in the report is that India has a limited framework for the protection of intellectual property related to life sciences. Now, an example of this is that India has a limited protection given to medicines. Now, this is because as soon as a medicine is given a patent, the price of those medicines drastically grow up. Whereby what happens is that only then one company which has applied for that patent for that medicine is able to manufacture or sell that medicine. And apart from this, if any other company then desires to produce those medicines, it has to then pay royalty for the patent to the original company. And what this does is increase the cost of that medicine. And it is within that regard that India has a very strict patent registration for medicines. However, what is currently seen is that most of the medicines are currently produced by companies in the United States. And since this international IP index has been formed by the US Chamber of Commerce, it is expected that they would criticize the patent law that India has with regards to medicine. Since if India were to give patents to medicines that have been produced by US companies, then what it would do is increase the cost of those medicines to be sold in India. And secondly, it would also become difficult for Indian manufacturing company in the pharmaceutical sector to also produce those medicines. The second weakness as highlighted in the report is that various patent requirements that India has is outside the international standards. And again, when the report says international standards, it basically means the standards which have been followed by the United States. Apart from this, India also has a lengthy pre-grant opposition proceeding. Now, what this means is that if any company has applied for a patent, then other companies or organizations can come up to the Government of India and oppose the giving of patent to this particular company or for a particular product. And what the report is trying to highlight is that this procedure is very lengthy within India. Apart from this, the report has also criticized the previously used compulsory licensing which was undertaken by the Government of India. In addition, the report also criticizes that India has limited participation in international IP treaties. However, the report does not mention as to which form of treaties it is talking about. And the last main cause of weakness which the report is highlighting is that India has no form of participation in International Patent Prosecution Highway. Now, this International Patent Prosecution Highway was started by the United States and Japan in 2006. Now, in simplest of terms, this means that if any product has been given a patent in the United States, and if that company again applies for a patent within Japan, then Japan would not go through the complete procedure of understanding whether this company should be given a patent or not, and it would rely on the original findings which had been undertaken in the United States. And what this would do is speed up the process for this company to get a patent in Japan. Now, what has happened is that India has indulged on a pilot project with Japan to form a patent prosecution highway. Now, what this means is that if any company in Japan has been given a patent, now then this Japanese office would have already formed an n number of procedures to grant this company a patent. Now, when this company would want a patent within India for that particular product, what the Indian government would do is ask the Japanese patent office for all the information with regards to the patent that they had formed when giving this company a patent within Japan. And what this would do is allow the patent office within India to look at the findings and the observations that have been given by the Japan patent office and then decide whether they want to give this company a patent in India or not. And therefore, what the patent prosecution highway does is speed up the process of whether a company receives a patent or not. And this is done by sharing of information by patent offices which are located in different countries. And it is within that context that this report has said that India is currently not participating in any form of international patent prosecution highway, whereby even the patent prosecution highway that India has with Japan is currently on a pilot basis. So now hopefully by understanding the causes of improvement and of weakness of India's intellectual property that have been provided in the International IP Index report, you would understand on how it is relevant with regards to your mains examination within GS paper 3. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this opinion-based editorial from page 9. Now what this article talks about is that recently United States and Russia have moved out of the INF treaty. And what this article highlights are the impact on China of this US withdrawal. Now in the DNS of 3rd of February, we had already discussed the INF treaty, whereby what had happened was the United States and Russia had suspended their participation from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty or the INF treaty, whereby the US has said that it is withdrawing from this treaty because Russia is developing the SSC-8 missile. And the US has said that this SSC-8 missile which Russia is developing violates the INF treaty. However, according to Russia, this SSC-8 missile which it is developing is within the purview of the INF treaty. But nevertheless, both the United States and after that Russia have decided to withdraw from the INF treaty. Now, apart from this, one of the main reasons as to why the US was withdrawing from the INF treaty is that it would provide the United States with new weapon options that were banned under the INF treaty, whereby these new weapon options then can be used by the United States to counter China in the Indo-Pacific region. Whereby what is currently happening is that this INF treaty currently is banning the United States and Russia from developing, testing, possessing ground-launched nuclear missiles which have a range from 500 kilometers to 5,500 kilometers. However, there is no treaty which has banned the development, testing, and possession of short and medium-range ground-launched nuclear missiles that can be built by China. And what this can do is allow China to gain dominance over the United States in the Indo-Pacific region, whereby the US is currently banned from developing such weapons, while China is currently not banned from developing these weapons. And it is within this context that this article is talking about on how China would be impacted now that the US has decided to withdraw from the INF treaty. Now, the first impact which has been highlighted in the article is that the United States can now reinforce their tactical missiles in the various military bases that the United States has in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, the United States has territories in the Diego Garcia Island. Apart from this, the US also has military bases in South Korea, Japan, Guam, Philippines, and in Australia. And what the United States can now do is form ground-launched nuclear missiles which have a range between 500 to 5,500 kilometers in all of these military bases. And all of these military bases are currently around China, whereby China currently has the ability to form such missiles. But under the INF treaty, it had banned the United States from forming such missiles. But now that the United States has withdrawn, it can now form and place all of these missiles in all of the US military bases that are located in the Indo-Pacific region, so as to counter China. The second point highlighted in the article is that the United States can now propose a fresh arms control treaty, which would include both Russia and China, whereby during the Cold War, it was the Soviet Union which was the biggest opponent of the United States. And now that China is the biggest opponent of the United States, it can now ask both Russia and China to sign a treaty which bans development, testing, possession of intermediate range missiles. However, the impact on China would be that it would weaken its capability against India, Japan, and other Asian powers in the Indo-Pacific region. Whereby now what would happen is that India, Japan, Vietnam, and other countries would have the capability of forming such missiles, but the United States, Russia, China would not. Now, the third and the final impact on China that this article has highlighted is that China would now require to develop hypersonic missiles and improve its strategic bombers and long-range air-launched cruise missiles to counter the short and medium-range missiles which the United States can now form. And thereby, according to the author, what this does is increase an arm race within the Indo-Pacific region, whereby now that the United States has withdrawn from the INF treaty and would be forming such missiles, it would then lead to China to form counter missiles to the short and medium range missiles that the United States may form. And for this, China may develop hypersonic missiles and would also need to improve its strategic bombers and air launched cruise missiles so that they are not targeted by any short and medium range ground based missiles which the United States may form in any of the military bases in the Indo Pacific region. Now, these are the various points that you needed to understand with regards to the current international importance of the US withdrawal from the INF Treaty. And so, now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now, we have taken this article from page 14. Now, what this article talks about is a very small news and can be understood from the article itself. Now, as you understand that most of the airplanes or aircrafts which are manufactured for commercial purposes are either manufactured by Boeing, which is a US company, or by Airbus, which is a European company. However, one of the biggest market that is going to emerge for commercial aircrafts is India itself, whereby India is expected to purchase around 1100 planes by 2027. And within that regard, the government has set up a committee for the development of regional transport aircraft, which can be used for commercial purposes. And within that regard, the government is preparing a roadmap so as to have a Make in India program for domestic manufacturing of aircraft. However, you have to understand that this news is currently in transition, whereby we'll have to wait and see as to once this panel is formed. And what is more important is to understand the roadmap which has been formed by this panel. So let us wait and see as to what would be the roadmap which would be given out by the Ministry of Civil Aviation so as to ensure a Make in India program for domestic manufacturing of aircraft. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 3. Now what this article talks about is that the Odisha government has decided to form a statue of Guru Padmasambhava. And this statue has been formed in the Gajapati district, which has one of the largest Tibetan refugee population within India. Now what you need to understand are various facts about Guru Padmasambhava from the perspective of your upcoming prelims examination of 2019, because each year either one or two questions are asked either on Buddhism or Jainism within your prelims examination. Now the first fact that you need to know about Guru Padmasambhava is that it literally means lotus born, and he is also known as Guru Rinpoche within Tibetan Buddhism. The second fact that you need to remember is that Guru Padmasambhava is considered as one of the fathers of Tibetan Buddhism, whereby it is considered that Guru Padmasambhava was born and brought up in Odisha, and after that he had migrated to Tibet around 749 AD. The third fact that you need to remember is that he is widely believed to be the second Buddha, especially within Tibetan Buddhism, which is followed in Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, and the Himalayan states of India, apart from various regions of Central Asia. The fourth fact that you need to remember is that in Tibetan Buddhism, he is also known as Dharma. The fifth fact that you need to remember is the Nyingma school, which is a part of the Tibetan school of Buddhism, also consider Padmasambhava to be a founder of their tradition. And the sixth and the last main fact that you need to remember is that the Hemis festival, which is celebrated in Ladakh, is dedicated to the birth of Lord Padmasambhava, whereby Lord Padmasambhava is also considered as the founder of Vajrayana Buddhism within Ladakh. Now these are the 6 main facts that you need to remember about Guru Padmasambhava with regards to your upcoming prelims examination of 2019. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this infographic from page 13. Now this infographic contains 4 information that are required to be understood. And all of these 4 aspects are currently in transition. So what we'll do is get a brief overview of all of these 4 topics. And after that, let us wait for the complete information to come out of the Reserve Bank of India. Now if you take a look at the first news, what has happened is that the Reserve Bank of India is thinking of forming an umbrella organization for urban cooperative banks. Now what generally happens is that urban cooperative banks do not have much avenues to earn a profit. And thereby the Reserve Bank of India is trying to form an umbrella organization for urban cooperative banks so that each urban cooperative bank is able to extend liquidity and capital to support each other. Apart from this, urban cooperative banks, because they are not earning much profit, they are not able to spend much more expenditure on IT-enabled services. And thereby what this umbrella organization would do is help urban cooperative banks to form a IT infrastructure. However, you have to understand that this news is in transition, whereby we have to wait and see as to in which form and with which features this umbrella organization for urban cooperative banks is formed. Now the second news is with regards to the non-banking finance companies. Now there are presently 12 different categories for non-banking finance company, and each of these different categories have their different regulations. And thereby this has become difficult for the Reserve Bank of India to regulate each sector of the non-banking finance companies. And therefore what the RBI is going to do is reduce these 12 categories to 3. However, we'll have to wait and see as to what would these 3 categories be and what would be the features of these 3 new categories. And thereby what the RBI has said is that the guidelines for the 3 new categories for the non-banking finance company would be expected by February end. So let us wait till February end to understand the new categories for the non-banking finance companies. The third news is with regards to collateral-free farm loan limit hiked. Now currently banks are able to give loans to farmers without any form of collateral up to 1 lakh. Whereby what the RBI is going to do now is issue a circular whereby banks will now be able to extend up to 1.6 lakh as collateral-free loans to farmers. However, we will have to wait for this circular to be released by the Reserve Bank of India. Now the fourth news is about the change in bulk deposit definition. Now earlier deposit of rupees 1 crore was considered as a bulk deposit, whereby RBI is now going to change this, whereby deposits over 2 crores will be defined as bulk deposits. Now this is because banks have been given the discretion to offer different rate of interest for bulk deposit. Thereby this move by the Reserve Bank of India, which is expected by February end, will enhance the operational freedom of banks, whereby they would be able to offer differential rate of interest on different bulk deposits. So now hopefully you've understood the 4 main news that have been given in this infographic, which are expected by February end. Now the written part for all of the 4 news have been given in today's PDF. However, since this news is in transition, let us wait and see on how the Reserve Bank of India moves forward with all 4 of them. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this article from page 1. Now what this article talks about is that the Reserve Bank of India has reduced the repo rate. And apart from this, RBI has also changed its stance from calibrated tightening to neutral. Now under calibrated tightening, what it means is that the Reserve Bank of India is either going to increase the rate or keep it at constant. However, under neutral policy, it means that RBI has the flexibility to either increase or decrease the repo rate. And that would depend upon the macroeconomic conditions of India. And similarly, under the third policy, which is the accommodative stance, means that RBI may reduce the policy rate. However, what is required for you to understand from this article is what is repo rate. Now we had already discussed about the repo rate, especially with regards to your prelims examination in the Daily News Simplified of 3rd of December. Now what I'll do is add this section of the video of the repo rate in today's Daily News Simplified. And thereby through this, we can try to understand as to what is repo rate from the perspective of your prelims examination. Now repo is a short form for repurchase option, and it is a money market instrument which is used to target inflation. Now the legal definition of repo rate as per the Reserve Bank of India Act of 1934 means that repo or the repurchase option is an instrument for borrowing funds, and this fund is borrowed by selling securities, wherein an agreement is signed to repurchase the securities at a mutually agreed future date, and this repurchase at a future date would be at an agreed price and an agreed upon interest rate. So let's say the State Bank of India has some government securities and it wants to sell these government securities to the Reserve Bank of India. Now let's say Reserve Bank of India buys these government securities from the State Bank of India for a period of 1 year at a price of 10 crores and at an interest rate of 7%. Now after this, the State Bank of India would have to buy back these government securities from the Reserve Bank of India after the period of 1 year. And the State Bank of India would have to buy back these government securities from the Reserve Bank of India at an interest rate of 7%. And this interest rate of 7% is known as the repurchase option or the repo rate, wherein the State Bank of India is repurchasing these government securities, and the rate at which this repurchase is being done is known as the repo rate. Now you have to understand that this is a simplified example, but hopefully you've understood the functioning of the repo rate. Now this repo rate or the benchmark policy rate is decided by the 6-member Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank of India. Now what has happened in this news is that the 6-member Monetary Policy Committee, which is headed by the Governor of the RBI Urjit Patel, has decided not to change the repo rate, And the reason they have decided not to change the repo rate so as to keep the retail inflation at 4%. Now, another aspect that you should understand is that if the repo rate is increased, then it is considered that it may lead to less borrowing for commercial banks. There also may be a higher rate for consumer loans that are given out by commercial banks. And lastly, if the repo rate is increased, there may be a chance that it may absorb the excess liquidity in the market. However, if the repo rate is decreased, then it leads to easier borrowing for commercial banks. Apart from this, there is also a chance that it may lead to lowering of rate for consumer loans. And lastly, if the repo rate is decreased, there is also a chance of an increased liquidity in the market. Now you have to understand that these impact of an increase in repo rate or a decrease in repo rate should be seen within the context of being speculative also. However, hopefully you've understood the various aspects with regards to the repo rate, wherein the repurchase option, which is known as the repo rate, is a money market instrument which is used to target inflation, and the legal definition of repo means an instrument for borrowing funds by selling securities. However, these securities which have been sold need to be repurchased on a future date on an agreed price and an interest rate. So if the State Bank of India has borrowed funds from the Reserve Bank of India by selling government securities, and therefore the State Bank of India would have to repurchase these securities on a later date. And for repurchasing these securities, the State Bank of India would have to pay interest to the Reserve Bank of India. And on the rate on which the State Bank of India repurchases the securities from the Reserve Bank of India is known as the repo rate. And this repo rate is decided by a 6-member Monetary Policy Committee, which is headed by the Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Now there are two questions for your practice, whereby the first question reads, consider the following statements. The first statement reads, the repo rate is the rate at which other banks borrow from the Reserve Bank of India. Now this statement was asked in the prelims examination of 2007. While the second statement reads, RBI's benchmark interest rate is decided by the Monetary Policy Committee. Now this statement was asked in the prelims examination of 2017. Which of the statements given above is correct? Now question number 2 reads, which of the following organization provide for the Environmental Performance Index? Now the first option reads, Yale and Columbia Universities in collaboration with World Economic Forum. Option B reads, Harvard and Columbia Universities in collaboration with World Bank. Option C reads, Harvard and Oxford Universities in collaboration with IMF. And option D reads, Oxford and Yale Universities in collaboration with UN. Now what you need to do is pause this video, solve both of these questions and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now the correct answer to question number 1 is C, both 1 and 2. Whereby with regards to statement number 2, RBI's benchmark interest rate is decided by the Monetary Policy Committee. Whereby this Monetary Policy Committee is headed by the Chairman of the Reserve Bank of India. While with regards to question number 2, option A is correct, that the Environmental Performance Index is given out by the Yale and Columbia Universities in collaboration with the World Economic Forum. Now there are 2 more questions for your practice, whereby question 3 reads, consider the following statements about Guru Padmasambhava. Whereby the first statement reads, Hemis festival marks the birth anniversary of Guru Padmasambhava. While the second statement reads, he is regarded as among the fathers of Tibetan Buddhism. Which of the statements given above is correct? While question number 4 reads, consider the following statements. Accommodative stance mainly intends for a decrease in policy rates. While second statement reads, calibrated tightening would mean RBI would keep rates constant or increase. Which of the statements given above is correct? And as you already understand, pause this video, solve both of these questions and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now the correct answer to the first question is C, both 1 and 2. Whereby the Hemis festival in Ladakh does mark the anniversary of Guru Padmasambhava. While with regards to question number 2, both statements 1 and 2 are also correct. Whereby apart from the accommodative stance and the calibrated tightening that the RBI has, RBI also follows as to what is called a neutral stance. Whereby under the neutral stance, the RBI would have the flexibility to either increase or decrease the policy rate such as repo rate by taking into account the macroeconomic conditions.
And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.